So Jacqueline is on our board. She's on the Upward board, but she's also an international speaker, an author, a consultant. She has worked with the likes of AMD, the FBI, Maxim Integrated, Standards & Poor's as a consultant and advisor to those companies. So she knows a whole lot about leadership, about development, about creating visionary organizations, and about developing the next generation of leaders to run our companies. So she's going to talk today about her experiences doing those things, and I would warn you that she is also a black belt in karate. So don't mess with Jacqueline. She looks tame and, Wales, Edinburgh. Yes, that's right. She looks like it, but she'll mess you up. Make sure you have your mic. She will mess you up if you're not nice to her. So, all right. So the format is going to be as we've had it in the past. We've got an hour, 30 minutes of my questions, 30 minutes of your questions. We'll have some folks coming around with mics, literally in 30 minutes or a little less. I'm probably going to start around 7:30. So you'll be preparing questions as we're going through this, because I think that's more interesting than me getting up here and asking lots of questions. I want you guys to get involved. And we're going to start, because you can see her books.
Good questions and good answers get you a copy of one of my books. So you might want to think about that.
Yes, so we will be handing those out once
and you
we
can
get
come
to
to
that
me
point.
afterwards for signing if you really want them signed.
Yes, indeed. And we got a few more back here, so do ask some good questions. We'll get to that at about 7:30. We'll end right on time at 8 o'clock. So you can see here that one of the first books is The Fearless Factor. And so, I think everybody has to deal with this at some level. Professional courage, a will to face opposition and continue to push through, achieving your dreams, achieving your goals. So why did you write this book, Jacqueline? I mean, what was the motivation for you, and what problem were you trying to solve in doing it?
I think it was really about sharing a message, because I wrote The Fearless Factor primarily at the urging of several people in my life who said that I had taken a journey through my lifetime of understanding what fear was really all about. And I feel like, fear for me was like having a serious disease. It was there from the day I was born till quite late into my 30s, when I really began to understand that I could do it differently. And when I say fear-driven, I mean it. I was born into poverty, violence, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, the whole 9 yards. I got it. And I don't see that as, at this point in my life, as being, a sad story. All I see that this was ammunition for me to go forward. So people wanted to know how I had come to the other side. They wanted to know how I became Fearless Jacqueline. And
it was the karate black belt, I'm pretty sure.
As I first told one of my first teachers, as I said, the lassie for the Highlands, the Scottish warrior. And mostly it was just rage-driven. Anger was a big piece of the driving force in me. And I don't know if anybody in the room can relate to that, but it certainly pushes you into dramatic situations, which I managed to do quite well. Thank you very much. So the writing of the book was really my way of explaining my story, my journey, and I also took the stories of other women and put them in the book too, because I wanted to know how they had taken the fearless journey. And here's what I say about being fearless. It's not the absence of fear. It's the choices and the decisions we make that to get past the fears that actually makes the difference in our lives. Because all of us have fears. It's pretty normal. But it's what you do with it. And it's also about the stories you tell yourself. And many of us go through life feeling like we're victims, and you're not a victim unless you choose to be. And that's a big message as well. So there's a lot of good juicy stuff in here, but it was really the journey that needed to be brought out.
And in the workplace, so we're all professional women, senior professional women. How do you deal with fear in the workplace so that you can maintain a positive attitude, you can maintain productive relationships, productive habits, in an environment sometimes it's very competitive, an environment that's not very nurturing in some instances, and where you feel like there's opposition. especially as professional women? How do you overcome those issues?
Well, I think the first piece that I always teach is, do you know who you are? And many times we get caught up in fears because we don't know who we are. You don't really understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, and all of those good things that identify you and how you deal with it. And let's face it, corporate America is a very toxic environment. I don't care which company you work for, forward-thinking or otherwise, most companies are extremely toxic. And it's riddled with fear. In fact, there was a book written, and you might want to check this out. It's called Overcoming the Fear Barrier. And it was written by Tom Riegert, who worked for Gallup for 20 years and did several studies over that period of time to show that, in fact, fear was the greatest barrier in the workplace. And mostly it comes from people who get territorial, people who are afraid to push the envelope, who don't make space for other people, who are busy guarding their little piece of the action and not lifting people up along the way. I'm writing a new book right now, we'll talk about that in a wee while, called Interfluence, which is the name of my company at this point. And what I talk about is it's not about creating great leaders, it's about creating better people. And there's not enough attention paid to helping people become better people within the organization. So you have all of your own normal, natural, whatever it is, your lack of self-esteem or your needing attention or whatever the case may be, all of that is at play in that workplace environment. And so when you get bosses who are bullies, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with a very insecure individual. When you have someone who blocks your way at every turn, it's because I'm afraid that you're going to take over from me. So you find those kind of things in the workplace over and over again. So you as an individual have to have the strength to be able to say, this is not about me. This is about this person that I'm dealing with. And then you have to develop the strategies to know how to get around them. And that's a big piece of this.
So tell us about that, because I think you have a unique leadership methodology for training executives to be highly collaborative, self-aware, self-empowered, driven, motivating. What are some of the things that you teach these companies that you work with on how to build those kinds of leaders? Because I think, we're kind of all, sometimes we've been faced with those challenges, right? Whether it's kind of turf battles or silos in organizations or, kind of bully bosses, difficult situations. What are you telling companies like Standard & Poor's and AMD and hopefully Intel at some point on how to deal with those issues?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is, let's find out who's in the room. Let's find out whether the challenges that they're meeting. And many times what I hear is, I have great ideas and I can't seem to get them moving. Or, I have a boss who shuts the door and doesn't talk to me. So many times I'll say to people, when was the last time you asked your boss, what is it that you need? What can I do for you? Because when you come in as a servant leader, and I'm a big believer in servant leadership, does everybody know what I'm talking about here? When you come in as a servant leader, you're really looking to that person above to find out, what is it I can do to serve you? Now, they might have a negative response to you, which is, oh, I don't know. And many times what happens is they don't even get the instructions on what they need to be doing. So you're left flailing in the dark. And then you get told it's wrong. Well, great, now I know it's wrong, but you could have helped steer me in the right direction. They don't take the time for you. They don't listen. And that's another big piece of this, is the communication thing. And I talk to companies and individuals about this. One has to learn how to listen. One has to learn how to talk to people. And it's not about keeping your good ideas to yourself. How many times have you sat in a meeting room and said nothing, knowing that you had something to contribute? Or maybe you contributed and they ignored you. And then you kind of skulked away and didn't do anything about it. Communication, listening, big pieces of this conversation. And then look around you and find out, who are your allies in this conversation? Mm-hmm. Who do you need to reach out to? Who do you need to build the relationships with? Because workplaces are like everything else. It's about relationships. Some of us do it well, some of us do it badly. I was reading a report recently that said Deloitte had done a study of 300 CEOs at Fortune companies and found out that 52% of the CEOs had no confidence in their direct reports for leadership. Well, excuse me, why is that? Yeah.
Why is that?
Why
What do
is
companies
that?
that you talk to say? I mean, do you have some juicy examples for us? You can leave the company names out if you want to. Unless it's Silicon Valley companies, then we really want to know.
Well, there's a few stories out there. You know, I mean, I'm talking to a group of senior leadership women at one of the biggest companies around here. And they all said the same thing, which is we find that we get stuck in our silos. We get stuck in this level of engagement that doesn't allow us to get forward. And one woman who'd been there for 18 years turned to me and said, I've given up. I don't see any point in pushing anymore. Now, the giving up piece is the disengagement, and as we know, that's a huge issue, again, within corporate America. You go to work, you're not motivated, you could give a shit about, you know, what's going on. You're there for the paycheck, and you leave home, or you leave the office at night for home, and whew, thank God that's over. You know, when we're spending 60 to 70% of our lives in the workplace, what are you selling your soul for? The paycheck, the health benefits, the this and that? But it's up to you to make the difference. You got to learn how to step it up, and that's one of the big pieces that I talk to my executives about. You know, and they do. I mean, they see themselves as pretty fearless, but the confidence part is still somewhat lacking.
Is there a profile of a company? Because I always think that, you know, high growth companies, and I work with high growth companies in venture capital, they are very entrepreneurial, they are very results oriented, they are very, let's get the best outcome because we're about getting the best outcome. So it's not about territory or turf or control, it's about growth, it's about sales growth. So you see that dynamic there, and I rarely do I see kind of what you're describing in corporate America in these growth companies. I think as companies mature, their growth slows, they become more dividend stock-ish rather than high growth stock companies. The culture starts to change and people start creating, you know, territories and boundaries and wanting control. Do you find that statistically in the companies that you've talked to?
Yeah, I mean, high growth.
Is there a way of overcoming that stodginess when the growth slows, which it does inevitably for everybody?
What happens is again, if you talk about the fear thing, they settle into status quo. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I've had so many conversations with HR executives, and they know that they need to train their people for the leadership succession pipeline. But right now it seems to be going along, and we're happy with the status quo. Because it becomes codified when it gets into that, well-established reign. Whereas in the growth situation, everybody's hungry. Everybody wants to drive this forward. And that's where you get excited and you feel like you're contributing something. But when you're in that status quo thing, and let's face it, for most of the established companies, that's where they live, because the CEOs themselves don't have the vision to drive it forward anymore, then that's where you find the boredom sets in, and it's just, this is the way we've always done it.
Complacency.
Which, I can never quite condone.
So if you have that situation, you've got a company and they become complacent, they've become, less motivated. What do you do to help them get the vision, a strategy, to build trust in their environments? One of the things we see a lot of is when there is the lethargy, there's a lack of trust, and people start protecting, their territory, their turf. How do you start to break them out of that mindset and that behavior? And does it require, the board getting involved and holding the CEO accountable? I mean, what's that look like if you're trying to break it down?
I think if we're trying to break it down, it has to come, from the top. I mean, we know that a lot of the places where it gets stuck is at manager level. Managers get entrenched in their little fiefdoms. So from the top down, And we're not talking about the old-fashioned leadership style. It's about developing that collaboration of awareness, first of all. Do we understand what's really going on here? And secondly, what can we do about this? And it's mostly about how can we get people re-engaged. Do you really care about getting people re-engaged? Do you feel that it makes a difference to do that? Now that takes a very forward-thinking individual. You know, we can point to Salesforce, for instance, Mark Benioff. He cares deeply about how people feel.
He's a little crazy too, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's a little crazy
Maybe you
too.
need a little of that as
You
well.
need a little bit of crazy in the world, you know? I mean, I've certainly lived a
I
great
know
deal
Mark
of my
too.
life
He's a good
in the
guy.
crazy
I say that
side.
jokingly.
But, you know, he feels for people. Emotional intelligence. Everybody knows that this is an important subject. How many of you feel like the managers in your company have high emotional intelligence?
Show of hands. High emotional IQ. EQ, excuse me, EQ.
EQ.
Are there like 5
Yeah.
people that have?
About 5 or 6 people in the room, maybe.
Wow.
Feel like somebody. So, can we start there? Can you teach this to people? Yes, you can. But it takes a time to do that. Oh, we don't have time. We'll just keep doing it the same way we do it because we don't have time. No, we don't invest in that kind of stuff. But we know it's important. Yes, we do. So this is the place where you have to push back and say, this is what we need. Can we have a collaborative conversation? Can we get in a room and talk about what really, truthfully, and here's the trust issue right here, can I truthfully talk about what's going on? How many of you feel like you're working in a place where there's a ton of secrets? Ah, one hand back there.
Okay, how many really think that? You can be
Yeah.
honest. It's just
Yeah.
us girls. It's just
I
us girls.
agree. It's just us girls. Let's talk about it, you know? The workplace is full of secrets. And it's mostly because we ain't talking to each other. And unless we can figure out how to reach across the aisles without falling on our faces, things will remain stagnant, things will remain dysfunctional, things will remain toxic.
Well, give us an example, though, because I think, it takes a lot of courage to stand up to, a culture, with lots and lots of people and with your boss in the room and all of those things.
Well, I'm not asking you to take on the entire organization.
Yeah, well, walk us through kind of what it would look like.
If you're an individual who has a boss, for instance, who is totally intransigent, doesn't seem to care how you feel or what it is that's up for you, then look around you. Who can you have that conversation with? Whether it's sometimes going above it. I had one client. I'll give you a story on that. I had one client. She worked for the nuclear industry. Now talk about testosterone-driven industry. This was a supremely smart woman whose job was to go into power plants and make sure that their psychology was running smoothly. So I hate to think about meltdowns in power plants, right? So she found that in the power plants there was a lot of problems because people were not communicating. Now I was her coach for a long time. And she knew that she wanted to build a better team. So we started looking at who are you surrounding yourself with. Now she had been invited to the UN to speak on organizational behavior in the nuclear industry. She had been out traveling the world, speaking at different symposiums on what she was seeing within the plants themselves. And when the Japanese plants went down, there was a lot of, excuse the pun, but fallout from that. And she was on the front lines of helping people understand what that looked like. But she had a female boss. And her female boss was not going to give her an inch. Not an inch, because she was getting popularity out in the world. She was getting people who were higher up in the organization who really liked her and really liked what she was doing. But this female boss said, I don't want to even entertain you, and I'm going to give you a terrible performance review. And she did. Well, she took that performance review to the higher up and said, excuse me, do you really think this is how I work? Because she's collaborative. She's genuine in her relationships. And eventually, the boss got booted, And she ended up taking over a team of 6 guys to revamp and recreate how they deal with all of these individual power plants. Now that's
a great story.
That's a great story.
I wish that happened more often.
And that's how you do it. You don't just settle for it. You don't say, oh, well, can't do anything about that. Yes, you can. But you've got to build strategic alliances so that you have somebody at your back when you know it's time to push. That's how you do it, right there.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that we focus on at Upward, right? I mean, it's about development. So learning how to lead, learning how to achieve your dreams, to achieve the next progression in your career, but doing that through your network, right? I mean, we women tend to be heads down, getting the work done, getting the job done, so we can get home and deal with the other balls that we have up in the air juggling, and we avoid or we backburn the networking piece. And so that's building the relationships so that you have the support when you are going to take a risk and step out and do something bold, so that you have options in case your idea doesn't play out the way you want it to, or in case there's opposition that you hadn't anticipated, or in case there's other issues that you don't anticipate.
Yeah.
So what are your tips on how to do that?
Here's the thing. You mentioned about keep your head down. Well, if you keep your head down, you can't see anything. So you got to keep your head up. And yes, you might be afraid it'll get shot off, but keep your head up.
Probably will.
And look around you. Think about your 10 people around you right now that you can see as allies within your workplace. Make a chart of those people and start building your relationships with them. I was talking to Lee tonight about how we as women, we need to develop these close relationships with people. You need to put yourself out, frankly. And you've got to be very strategic about it. I came to the Bay Area 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. I knew no women. I had some old friends here, but they weren't in my field and, wasn't really connected. So I strategically set out to build this amazing network. And when Lisa and I met last July, we had an hour-and-a-half conversation. At the end of it, she said, oh, I like what you're doing. Would you like to join my board? And I went, yeah, I think I could do that. Because I'd been strategic about who I needed to talk to. And I was introduced to Lisa by somebody else who was strategic. So this is what I'm urging you right now. Think about who's in your network and who you have to strategically build a relationship with in order for you to move to the next level. Because none of us gets there alone. That's a big piece of it. And we as women, we go to these networking events, and this is one of my pet peeves, so please excuse me. You'll make a lot of yada yada around the room, you'll collect a bunch of cards, and then you'll go home and you forget about it. Many of you don't bother following up, and if you do follow up, the person on the other end doesn't bother responding. Anybody familiar with that scenario? Everybody in this room, right? Yeah. So be strategic about who you want in your life and what you want from them, which is another big piece of this. What do you want from them? And what can you give them? Because it's reciprocity. And as servant leaders, you should be about serve first, get later. That's really how it works. So that's a big piece on that one.
That's good. That's very good. All right. Well, so we're all out trying to achieve our dreams, find our passion. I mean, what's your take on what real success looks like for your career, for your life, real fulfillment? Because that's the other thing, right? We've got these balls again, we're juggling, right? We want fulfillment, we want family, we want a career, we want friendships, we want to advance, we want to do all these things. How as women do we go about doing that and really having fulfillment? Because sometimes it's not just enough to get the promotion.
No, and it really is, forget work-life balance. We all know by now that's a mythology. It doesn't exist. It's about choosing the priorities in your life. So sometimes it'll be your family, sometimes it'll be your work, sometimes it'll be your extracurricular activities that you enjoy doing. Many of you know, if you've looked at my website, I have a home in Bali, and I run retreats there for women. And the biggest complaint that I get is, oh, I really want to go to Bali. Yeah, but you have to take 10 days off. Oh, I can't take 10 days off. Now, if you don't give yourself some time off, and I lived in Europe for 12 years, they have month-long vacation there. They definitely take advantage of every minute of it. So, if you don't give yourself that gift, the fulfillment comes from knowing that I can't do everything, but I can do what feels right for me in the moment. And success isn't necessarily about how much money in the bank or what status you've got or what kind of house you're living in. It's about how do you feel inside. I always come back to this. How do you feel inside about you? I feel really good about me. After a lifetime of a great deal of animosity and a great deal of self-abuse, by the way, if you read the stories, you'll understand a little bit more. But I really like me at this point in time. And there was a time in my life when I could have said, I really don't like you. And I had behavior that mirrored that. So give to yourself if you're looking for that fulfillment. And people say follow your passion. It's like go follow your passion. Yeah, follow your passion, but be strategic. Very simple. So fulfillment is truly, there's no magic bullet. There's no easy answer for everybody. We'll all feel fulfilled in different ways, but it's always going to be about you. And I'm not, coming back to what am I doing that serves me in a good way, knowing that I can't have it all, but I can certainly give it my best shot.
Okay, with that, we will open it up for some questions. We've got about 20 minutes left. So yes, Roberta, you get the book. Which book do you want? All right. When the Crow Sings. Okay.
Thanks. I have a two-part question for you.
Sure.
One is, first of all, I love that you just go to your inward self because that's what creates our external reality, so I love that. I'm curious about what your own either meditative or self-reflective or grounding or mindfulness practices are for you that you've used that work. And then the second part of my question, totally unrelated, is I'm curious about how many women you've coached along the lines that have actually left corporate America to find their own inner happiness.
Yeah, that's good questions. Thank you. As far as my mindfulness practice is concerned, I do meditate every morning, or at least I try to. It's not for very long. I give myself 15 minutes to just take that moment to be still, because I'm a very active individual. And like this morning, I was up at 3:30 because the brain woke up and said, "Oh, you've got things to do. You might as well get up now." So, those moments are really, really precious and very important. I tend to be very disciplined because of my martial arts training. So the commitment, the focus, the discipline, all of that stuff comes to bear. And I see that, I used to say this, that my martial arts training was my meditation. And to the second part of your question, which is, remind me again.
Women you've coached.
Well, how many women have I coached that have left corporate America? I can't give you a specific number, but I can tell you quite a few. And most of them were in their 40s who looked at me and said, I don't know what I want to do anymore. And after some coaching, they decided that it wasn't going to be in that game. Yeah.
We have 8 questions. Okay, so you were up first. Yes, you, the lady there.
Run around. My name is Angel. You talked about how we as women need to seek out strategic alliances, but can you talk about how we can be good allies to each other and to be someone that's sought out as part of a strategic alliance?
Very simple question. How can I serve you? What can I do to help you? One of my favorite questions is to say to somebody, for instance, in a gathering like this, what's your greatest challenge right now? What do you need help on? That in itself opens up a wide variety of conversations. Yeah.
The only reason I kind of want to follow up on this is because it's one thing to express to someone, what can I do for you? But how do you, and what question do you need to ask to be able to really fulfill that for that person? Because you talked about how you can ask, your boss, how can I help you? And then you don't get it done correctly. But then when you ask to help someone else, how can you actually be effective at making sure that you are serving their need in like I said, being a good ally for that person.
So I'll give you an example. When I work with my assistants, I will basically say to them, if there's something you don't understand, please ask me. Because many times we feel like if we're told it once, we're supposed to know it. Well, that doesn't work that way. You know, you can tell me once and I didn't get it. You can tell me again, maybe I'll get it. And if you have to tell me 3 times, well, then I'm really screwed. But, you know, make sure that you're having a conversation where you understand what's needed. They understand what it is that you're trying to do. So it's being clear in that communication to make that happen. So again, coming back to specifics of, if this is what you want me to do, just let me reiterate that for you. Make sure that I heard it properly, and then I'll go away and do what I need to do. So take the time for those little extra steps. That's a big piece of it right there. But that question of what's your greatest challenge and how can I help you is a fabulous question.
Let me add one thing to that, because I think, especially in Silicon Valley, it's been my experience that servanthood and approaching people that way may present an appearance of weakness. I don't agree with it at all, but there is a perception that if you're not out there, you're not driving, and you're not taking the lead, and that you are weak, or you are less competent, or you are less capable, and you are somebody that can be walked over. So how do you manage that tension?
Right. And again, it's, from the point of view of, if you're looking at this as a weakness, and many people do see that as a weakness, I get that. I want to give you the best I can give you. Again, a slight reframe on this. I want to do the best I possibly can for you. So can I just make sure that we're all clear on what it is that we're working on here, what is needed? I think that's a big piece of it. The vulnerability piece. Because here's the thing for many women, they're afraid to speak up. And so when you remain quiet and you remain subservient, how are we supposed to make progress? And it's really down to not worrying about what other people think, because what they think is none of your business.
Okay. There's Ellen's question here, and then we're going to get in the front as well. So Ellen. Eileen, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay, so it's pretty good follow-on question to that one. So when you're in that moment when you have to find the courage, right? Whether it's going into a meeting and saying something you know is going to be unpopular, whether it's firing someone when it's horrible if you ever have to fire someone. Like, there are all these moments as leaders where we have to find that inner courage. Do you have any techniques or approaches that you recommend to people on, in that moment when you know you're going to have to be brave, right, and fearless? How do you find that?
I'll show you.
She's going to practice this karate chop on somebody. Who wants to be the volunteer? Not me.
So, one of the exercises I give my people, and you probably know this, body language is important. And this is a power stance. Your feet are apart. And one of the things you can do before you go into that meeting, find yourself a quiet space, maybe the ladies' room, nobody's around. I want you to put your hands out and feel the energy that's running to your fingertips. Everybody right now, do it upwards because there's not much movement. So, if you think about energy, think about what's at the tip of your fingers right now. What are you feeling? Tingling. Exactly. So if you think of yourself as a tall tree, you're bringing the energy in from the sky, down through the body, into the roots. Now, for those of you who do mindfulness training, meditation, you know this exercise. It's about pulling that energy in and that force. Now, what happens is, because you're psyching yourself up, essentially, you're ready for that conversation. Now, as a woman, I always forget about these things. I'm singing voice, I forget. As a woman, you have the compassion, the empathy, and all that stuff going on. Some women don't, but, I'm presuming you do. So you're now grounded, and you're ready for that difficult, awkward conversation. My husband has a great story on this. He used to say when he was younger that people would thank him for firing them because he was so generous in his praise of who they were. Before he would say, your ass is out of here. So that's that piece. And what you're really talking about is the confidence to know that, there's sometimes things that have to be done that are not easy. They're awkward, and people are going to be really unhappy. And here's the other piece of news I have for you. It's not your job to make other people happy. And as women, we're frequently people pleasers. So I would say that is probably something for you to think about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Read a book for Lane. Great. Jude. June.
Thank you. And I like that it was upward.
That's right.
Exactly.
We're pointing
Yeah,
up to heaven. There
We're
we go.
upward.
I had a question. You said, look at about 10 people in your life to surround yourself with. And what does that relationship look like?
It will go from being extremely personal and close to a little bit distanced. So if you think of it as circles, and you think of building your circles outwards. So right in the center is you. And then your next circle in is the people that you have some intimacy with. The circle beyond that is the people that you perhaps have in your circle and you need to build a stronger relationship with. And then the circle beyond that may be people that you don't know very well, but you want to know better.
Okay, I guess let me ask the question a different way. You mentioned that you should have 10 people in your life that you look to. I think you were talking about for mentorship or
For advice.
For
Yeah,
advice.
yeah.
What does that relationship look like?
Well, it could be a mentor relationship. It could be people that you go to specifically or advisor relationship. I mean, how many of you have advisors when you go and you ask a question? Yeah. How many of you have mentors in the room? Okay, quite a few. How many of you have sponsors? All right, good. So the 10 people that I'm talking about in your life are the ones that you've already gathered around you. How many people do you have in your life right now? I bet you there's a few hundred. But there's not a whole lot that are up close and personal with you, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So for you, looking at your vision of where it is you're going, what do I need? Who do I need? Who do I need to have these conversations with? How do I ask for support? How do I get support? Because that's really the only reason why we have a network, isn't it? Because our lives are built on relationships. And building those strong relationships is really where these first 10 people come in. These are the strong relationships. And then you can build out from there. They say we can't have more relationships with more than 150 people at any given time.
Okay, the relationships, are they business? Are they personal?
We're
It
gonna,
can be both.
yeah, why don't we
Oh, I'm sorry.
get a couple more
They
questions?
can be
Yes, there's like 9 more questions.
Hi.
Hi.
So I think I maybe share the commonality with you of being an athlete and the diligence that comes from that. And I was fortunate to be able to work with a sports psychologist for a number of years to overcome that fear, but it really did take a lot of hands-on worksheets and really personal reflection. So I was just wondering, could you share anything that, say, that we can do tonight to go home and reflect on what our fears are? Because I think before we can get to the step of overcoming fears in the workplace, going home and being able to reflect on the fears that we've been hiding and masking as disengagement would be a critical step.
So very simple exercise. Draw a circle and put the word fear in it. And then take a whole lot of little bubbles around it and put the words that you associate with that fear. And then ask yourself one simple little question. Is it true? Is it true I might lose my job? Is it true that I can't have the relationship I'm looking for? Is it true that my boss won't let me do what I need to do? Do you have empirical evidence for it? Because you all know the acronym for fear, which is false expectations appearing real. So it's a questioning. That's the exercise I would give you to do. It's a very simple one, but it's a powerful one because it really gets you in touch with the stories you tell yourself, stuff you make up. And many times it's because you don't have enough evidence. So go find the evidence for it. So if you think somebody's not communicating with you, or you just think somebody's blocking your way, try to find out if that's true or not. It might just be they're too busy and they're not noticing.
Question here? Yeah. Mike.
So I thought it was really interesting when you guys were both talking about your perspectives. Let's see if I can get this right. So you were talking about the corporate world and just running 100 miles an hour and everyone driving, and you were talking about being the servant. What I think is really interesting is, so I'm an individual in high-tech software sales. I work for a security company, software security consulting company, and then prior to that, I worked for HP, and like I totally know the world of the high tech and being a driver and making the numbers and just driving hard. But then what's interesting is you asked how do you do that because it doesn't work in that world. Well, I just kind of saw this paradigm, or I don't know, I just saw something in the truth of what both of you all were saying when you said, because sometimes our management, they come to us a lot with, how can I help you? In sales. So they look like the servants, even though in reality, they're driving the numbers and they're pushing us very hard to make the number, but they're coming to us with that approach. So I just wanted to share with people the fact that I understand both of what you're saying. It's like true. And you might not see it, but I see it. And anyways, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit. And then I wanted to ask the question for myself, more or less, because I feel like you said follow your passion, and I feel like I'm following my passion in security. I'm trying to get back to work, and security is a very male-driven, high-tech field, and to be the leader in this field is very hard to sort of re-engage and get myself back into where I need to be and where my passion is. And so I was thinking about also what you were saying on how to serve someone. And I've tried this where I've reached out to someone to help them in a high-tech corporate event, put myself in the security, and just volunteer my time. And it's funny, I can't get any response from something like that. So I kind of wanted to ask you, how do you, what do you tell someone like me that thinks they're doing all the right things, trying to re-engage back into the and network the right way, but maybe I'm just not doing it right, or maybe that will come from your next session, or maybe. But I wanted to hear from you just what your perspective is on what you think is the your method for sort of networking right and following your passion that way.
Well, I think the first thing I would say to you is there's no right or wrong here. So when you're making judgments about, not doing it right, you're automatically looking for where's the barriers that I'm putting in my own way.
And I feel very fearless. I don't feel this fear.
Well,
at
if you're
all, and where I'm
working in
going
a
when I'm doing it,
male-dominated
how-
industry, so I get it, and it's sales, and it's also very male-dominated. So there's a lot of testosterone you have to deal with. So for you, being able to stand in your own power around this is going to be really important. Doing it better, I would say, is really about, who are you really talking to? Are these people that really not going to make a big difference? Or is it people that you don't have in your circle that you would like to have in your circle? So how do you build a relationship with them? And it's not about going to the golf course, by the way, because that's kind of redundant at this stage of the game. It's really about how can we have a conversation, because I share your vision and your dream, and I want to be able to participate in that. And that can be a very heartfelt, trusting conversation, if you're willing to take it. Does that make sense?
That's good.
Yeah.
Question here.
Hi.
Hi.
I have just one fear right now. After a gap of 5 years from full-time work in high tech, my 2 little boys are old enough that I can leave them in daycare and go back to work. So I have an interview coming up, but probably, but I've had at least 4 rejections or 5 in the last 2 weeks because I have a gap. So I've been figuring out how to market myself in a way that shows what I did during the gap. And I mean, my only fear is if I keep getting rejections, I'm going to erode confidence. So.
Yeah, it's that terrible double standard thing again, isn't it? You know, it's like we all want families. Somebody has to go away and do it. And when they come back, it's like, ooh, well, you know, you kind of lost your chance here. It is a terrible double bind. I get it. I really do. And the fact that you've been on interviews and it still hasn't broken the ice. Were you on any kind of volunteer situations at all?
Yes, I did some consulting. And,
Okay. And is that on your resume?
Yes, and I did some help for nonprofits, volunteering at schools.
Okay.
I have a lot of things, courses. But what was interesting was people were recommending me within a company, but the applicant tracking system within 24 hours said, you know, we don't have a place for you. And some of them are the same skills that what was needed was the same skills I did 6 years ago. You know, the technology just changed a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, say, evaluating search engines. So,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah,
had to deal with the instant rejection. So.
I would hesitate to kind of jump into that one. I think there's a big confidence issue here too. And as you said, you don't want to lose your confidence. So being able to step in and say, you know, what is exactly that you need here? How can I bring what I've done? And I would actually highlight all the different elements of what you've been doing for the last 5 years, in, again, strategically placing it there. But having those conversations and the vagaries of people's biases during the interview process has filled books. Many, many books. We all know this. So there's no easy answer on that one. But I would absolutely encourage you to just keep pushing away. Maybe Lisa's got something.
Well, no, actually, I would underscore the importance again of having network, right? Because generally speaking, people find the jobs from people they know. And women have to face the fact that we may want to step out of the workforce. I always say, don't step out of the workforce. You don't have to. You can slow it down a little bit. I think we're kind of on or off. But you can tone it down a little bit, have a family, maintain your job and stay in the game, because there is a perception when you get out of the game that you are out of the game. And even if you try to get back in, there's a question about your commitment and your desire and your will. Are you going to get back out again when it becomes inconvenient for you? So you have to overcome that. But stay in the game would be my first advice. The second advice would be to build a network, because again, you don't want to have to find a network of people that can help you get your next gig when you need to. That's the worst time to have it. So you have to invest some part of your time, some large part of your time, developing the relationships and maintaining them. Maintaining them. And the women tend to have professional networks and social networks. They're not integrated. Men tend to have a single person that is a colleague and a friend. And so it's a little easier for them because they don't have as many relationships to maintain. But they work at it. They spend a large percentage of their time working on those relationships. And they still think they're rock stars, right? I mean, they still like, I'm doing the job, I'm 100% in, and they may be spending 50% of their time on it, realistically. Whereas if we're not spending 80, 90% of our time on a job and perfecting it, we feel like we're less than effective. You've got to set that aside. You've got to spend half of your time working on relationships, going to conferences, being visible, talking about your success, talking about your progress, letting people know what you want in your career, what your dreams are, what your ambitions are. I tell you, every guy I talk to, no offense, David, but every guy I talk to, they give me their resume before the conversation is over every single time. I mean, in some way, shape, or form. And we tend to just kind of not do that. So do more of that. Work the network, guys. This is the reason I started Upward. Upward is about the network. It's not just about, developing and learning and all of those things. Those are important. That's a part of the package. But if you're not going to take these relationships and proactively do something about them, then it's a waste of your time. This is about community. It's about community. And you're going to help each other advance. Be proactive and deliberate about it. But you have to do it because it's not going to come to you otherwise. Guys do it, they do it. And credit to them. And we have a question in the back and 3 on the side here, but you had her hand up first, all the way to the back. I'm sorry, and we'll get you next.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for your insights, and thanks to you too. I just want to draw upon what you have just shared with us. It is so, it feels so bad when some of the male counterparts, if I'm speaking for some idea, they will shush me down, sir, or ignore it. I didn't say it. And in the very next meeting, some male guy actually uses my slide, doesn't put my name there, and just, oh wow, this is a brilliant idea, and puts a nice picture there. It just breaks my confidence. I mean, and I know that I'm performing at 1.5 or twice the level of the person whom I'm being compared to. Still, I get the opinion that you need to do more to get the promotion. And I hit a brick wall because I can't ask for it more. And I love the job that I'm doing. It's exactly what I want to do at this point of my time. And I know that my career aspirations, it will fulfill that. But then how do I break these walls around it? How do I tell people, you're using my work and I don't get any credit and feels bad to me?
It's a great question.
That sounded pretty good, actually.
It's a great question, and of course we know many stories that are exactly the same. You know, a woman will put forward an idea and it's brushed over, and then the guy steps in, and it's like they thought of it. And, you know, you're feeling like you're screwed, frankly. Your job is to say, excuse me, but don't you remember at the last meeting we had blah, blah, blah? And I really appreciate that you took it and built upon it. So it's not about saying, screw you, because, you know, you did the dirty. You want to show that person up. You want to say, I really appreciate that you took my idea and ran with it. How wonderful. Where do we go from next? Does that work?
There's another question here. Thank you. Yes, you. Sorry. Mike.
Two questions. One is a follow-up to your earlier comments about asking your leader, what do they need from you? What if they can't articulate that? What if they don't know? How do you appear strong and help them when maybe they don't really know?
Okay. So you have some of the details, 9 times out of 10. You have some of the details. They're not able to fill in the rest of it for you. So what about if you sit down and you go, you know what? I've got this part of it, and I think, you know, we could maybe discuss this next piece, because if you think you're more articulate than he is, then at least show that piece of you. Because they don't have to have all the answers, because most of the time they don't. But if you think that you are grasping what it is that he's looking for, and you need to fill in the details, then supply him with some of the details, so that he can say yes or no. And then if he says no, then you go, okay, so maybe you can give me some idea on what it is that we're looking for here. And just keep asking questions. Here's the thing about great leadership. It's about questions. Get curious. Here's the thing. Many of us get curiosity knocked out of us as adults. Children are extremely curious. But as adults, we think somehow it's not polite to be curious and ask a lot of questions. But unless you're asking questions, you ain't going to get the answers. So keep asking the questions until you get the answer you're looking for.
Thanks. So the second question is, how do you create space if you're leading a team that has a tremendous amount of work to do and you're not going to be able to get more resources to help them? How do you allow them the space that you think they need to actually become more productive? If sometimes taking a break or being human and having some balance will, I think, help them become more productive and creative. How do you create that where the culture is really all about hard driving and how many hours you're putting in? Do you have suggestions about how to deal with that?
Well, I think you kind of answered your own question there in some ways. You know, it's like people need a bit of breathing space. And if you don't give people breathing space, then ultimately they get burned out. And production goes down, and performance goes down, and all the rest of it. So if you're in charge of that team, it's up to you to be able to figure out where's the small gaps that you can give. Because it will come as an act of generosity from you, which puts you in greater stead. They will build trust and loyalty with somebody who respects them and understands that, yeah, we all need a little breathing room, even if it's for 15 minutes. You know, but here I am. I'm going to make that available to you. So if that's the issue here, we will all be far more productive if we're given a little bit of breathing room. And that's really the best answer I can give you at this point in time. But, you know, if you're in charge of it, make the space for them. Yeah.
All right, that'll be our last question. It's 8 o'clock, folks, so feel free to come down if you have more questions for Jacqueline, but I want to make sure you all get out here on time, get to your families, but she's going to be down here. Actually, we got a couple more books, so if you're down here first, you may get a book as well. Thank you all for
I
coming.
want to thank
Appreciate
you all.
it.
This has been great. Thank you.